everybody. Welcome to the 101st episode of the Manor Podcast. I'm your co-host, Roger Bodee, joined as always with my best friend and other co-host, Michael Hamilton. Michael?
Is that coffee? What is that mystery?
I'm pouring coffee. I'm very tired. This is going to be my first sip of coffee of the day. This is a rare sight. Anybody who is listening or watching the podcast just saw me before I had a single ounce drip of caffeine in my system. I managed to get through a whole podcast intro. Look at me. I'm on top of the world.
So I was feeling pretty sick last night, which is when we usually record our podcast. So instead of recording a podcast, I was sleeping on the floor in front of my bathroom in my room. And Roger so graciously offered to record at 7 o'clock bright and early the following morning. Thank you.
Yeah. For those who are not aware, I'm not a morning person. I do not. The morning is the worst time of day by far. Nothing good happens in the morning. Everything good happens at night. Everything should be scheduled noon or later in the world. That's my ideal world. That is not how the world works.
It's not.
You know what, Michael?
What?
I usually say something very witty and insightful and fun here to transition to our sponsor, but I still have only had one sip of coffee, so Realm Games.
Yeah, so Realm Games have their Realm Fest coming up in New Jersey in a few weeks. I will be there. There's a 5K CC Flesh and Blood tournament and then a 2K Blitz Battle Hardened. Planning to play both of those. No idea what I'm playing in Blitz. Probably just playing Enigma and CC. I have not done a lot of Flesh and Blood testing.
Arachne.
I'm not playing Arachne in Blitz.
But your stealth attacks get go again, dude. It's so good.
Yeah.
Think about it. Your 0-for-1s get go again.
Uh-huh. So I can play what's it called? Bonds of Agony.
Uh-huh.
Attack for 1 with go again.
Mm-hmm.
Value.
They have to play around your 3 reactions that you have to have on natural with cards in your hand because you don't have any access to any of the double.
You can flick knives, right?
True, yeah, you can flick knives.
You can play Mask of Perdition.
Yes, that is a legal card.
I would not advise that one, but you can do it.
Be it just a nick.
Just next good.
Well, good deck.
I think you can play the 0-for-3 block 3 that only targets stealth cards in Arachne because you got to play a bunch of red stealth cards to go with the blue stealth cards that you want to just nick.
That's fair.
That's fair. This is transition to an Arachne discussion, but my worry is when you draw the blue stealth attacks and you don't have pumps, what are you doing with them?
Attacking for 1.
I think I'm not playing Arachne. I think honestly I'm most likely to play Brute. I played KO at my last. Actually, my last games of Blitz were with KO at the Battle Hardened in in Texas. I flew out to it, booked my flight and everything. It was like the week before the Pro Tour 4, whatever the most recent Pro Tour was, the one that was Dromai 1. And I booked my flight to it, and I'm like, I'm ready to get some CC reps before the Pro Tour. And then, like 2.5 weeks before, Michael Fong messages our group chat with me and Brody, and he's like, what are we playing in this Blitz Battle Hardened? And I'm like, what? Blitz? But this time, I knew the Battle Hardened was Blitz.
That's good. This is getting dangerously close to turning into a Flesh and Blood episode. We gotta stop it now before the Flesh and Blood gets any deeper.
Okay. So what are we talking about today then?
Alpha Clash.
Oh, I like that game.
You won a tournament about it, right? You won the whole Clash Ground event.
I did win a Clash Ground. In Columbus, Ohio, there's a convention called Origins Game Fair, and they had a Clash Grounds Alpha Clash tournament at it that I took down playing a blue-green Machina deck.
Yeah. So I guess one of our patrons kind of, I guess if we're stepping back and the coffee's hitting the bloodstream and I'm remembering how life works again. One of our patrons said, "It seems like we just dived right into the deep end of Alpha Clash. Do uh, do you want to talk about more about just like the overall fundamentals before we get into the granular things, or do you want, because that seems to make sense? Let's talk about Alpha Clash broadly, and then we'll do a tournament report."
Okay, so I guess like Alpha Clash from a Flesh and Blood player's perspective, since I assume most people that are listening to us that aren't already familiar with Alpha Clash are pretty familiar with Flesh and Blood.
Probably safe assumption.
So, all right, so Alpha Clash, it's a 1v1 card game similar to Flesh and Blood. You have a contender that has some stats on them and a health total and multiple abilities. It's basically your hero in Alpha Clash,
Mm-hmm.
but or your Flesh and Blood hero in Alpha Clash. They have different life totals. They usually have 20, 25, or 30. I don't know if we've had any that have broken that pattern, but
Sounds right to
well,
me.
yeah, and they all have different abilities. Um, there's 5 colors in the game, same 5 colors as Magic: white, blue, red, green, and black. Um, you build a deck of 50 cards for constructed, get a 10 card sideboard. It's played best of 3 currently. May change, but currently it's best of 3. You play game 1 unsideboarded, then you play games 2 and 3. After the first game, you get a sideboard.
Yeah. So right now, I think your most ringing endorsement for the game is that you think it is lower variance than Flesh and Blood,
Yes,
right?
I do believe that is the case.
So is that why you win all the tournaments, because it's so low variance?
I do think that helps. So, a couple of things about Alpha Clash. If you've played Magic, it takes a lot from Magic. Like, I guess most card games take a lot from Magic, but it's closer to Magic than like Flesh and Blood is to Magic, where you have a deck full of essentially creatures, but they're Clash cards in Alpha Clash, but they function as like your units that you use on the field to attack and defend and do things with. But the biggest reason I think Alpha Clash is fairly low variance is one, you don't have like lands and spells you have to draw. You draw a hand and you can use any card as a resource card, which similar to Flesh and Blood, you pitch whatever cards you want. In Alpha Clash, you can take any resource and you can use it, or any card, and you can use it as a resource. You have a zone for your resources, and each turn you get to take one card from your hand and put it in your resource zone. Very similar to Star Wars Unlimited if you've played that game as well. And I think Lorcana also has a similar thing. Though Star Wars and Lorcana both have face
And
down.
Kaijudo and Duel Masters.
Okay. Well,
Remember we played Duel Masters? It was the best card game you've ever played in your life.
is that the game that we played like 3 times at the airport? And I decided this game was horrible.
Yeah, it was so fun.
Yeah, so fun. But the thing with Alpha Clash is instead of having your resources face down, they stay face up, and then the color of the card, they produce that color of resource. So if you draw too many of the same card or cards that you don't want, you can resource them. And making it's very high skill expression, choosing which cards to resource based on your matchup and the game state and stuff like that. So I think that's one factor that lowers variance. The next is you play with a 50 card deck, which is smaller than most other card games have 50 cards, and you get to have 4 copies of each card in your deck. So if you build a deck of all 4 ofs, except you'll get 48 cards, 12 different cards with 4 copies of each would be 48 cards, and you have 2 slots left. That just means like whatever cards you put 4 copies of in your deck, you're just so likely to draw them because you get 4 cards and you're only playing a 50 card deck. Next is the mulligan system and the opening hands. You start with 8 cards in your opening hand, and then you can choose any number of cards to keep. You take the rest, you shuffle them back in, and you draw that many cards. So if you're playing a deck that really needs one specific card to function, between the 50 card deck, 4 copies of it, and the very generous mulligan rule, you're over 80% to find that card in your opening hand. So you can really like build a deck around a certain card or a certain strategy. But the biggest reason I think it's pretty low variance is you can mulligan, like if you know your matchups and you know what kind of draw you need to beat your opponent, you can mulligan pretty aggressively for that. And a lot of the time you'll have what you need basically because of how giving the system is.
Which is why one of the most terrifying things you can hear at the start of the game is, I don't need a mulligan. No mulligans here. You're like, oh no, they already have the perfect hand. I'm dead.
Yeah, I think it's pretty rare that you should keep all 8 of your cards, but I think I did it once in the Clash ground and I won
I
that
did it
game.
once, yeah. Here's my explanation for the game. It's very elegant here. Here, we got a little Magic the Gathering card here, and we got a Flesh and Blood card here, and we're gonna to do. And now they're an Alpha Clash card. They put them together. Wow, that's basically what the game is to me. Except for people. It's not 1993-94 Magic vibes. It's not old Magic vibes. It is very much 2024 current day uh, Magic vibes when I talk about it combining with Flesh and Blood, for better and worse. Which I don't think Magic's a horrendous game now, but I kind of got into this a little bit on the 100th episode, where the design sensibilities of the game are very much pushed for the creatures, but they're called clash cards in the game. So the on-board things you attack and defend with are very much more powerful than anything else in the game at the moment. And uh, also, there's no summoning sickness, so you can play a card. So in summoning sickness, it was in Magic. In Magic, it was you play your card. You can't attack with it on the first turn. You can't use its activated abilities. And Alpha Clash, just attack with that bad boy. You play your 6/6, attack with it right off the bat. You're at 25 health, and you get to an end game and you get attacked for like 6. So you're just immediately at 19 if you've played a perfect game up to that point, which is very rare that happens. And there's no real meaningful ways to interact with attacks like that outside of like very conditional, hard to use, clunky cards.
Yeah, I think the most common way to interact with that is you have a small creature behind or a small Clash card behind that you just want to jump block their thing with, but you can't stop them from attacking. And some things even just clear out your blockers either before they attack or when they attack. So doesn't always work, and something you have to be aware of. The games in Alpha Clash generally, I'd say they go a decent number of turns, but you don't see games that go like 20 turns very often. At least in constructed, you really don't see that. In limited, they can get more board stally, and I think I haven't played as much limited of this game as I would like to. I got my first real taste of it at the Clash Ground in Vegas. They had a pre a world premiere of the third set that just came out, and playing sealed of that was really fun. But yeah,
Fair.
because of everything basically being able to attack the turn it comes down in constructed, especially, there's a lot of good removal and everything can attack the turn it comes down. It means that games usually end before like turn 10 or around turn 10. That's like the latest I really expect games to be going.
Yeah. And there were even methods to kind of be more controlling and have damage stacking, I guess, but they overhauled the rules in a major way recently that makes even that method a lot harder to implement, which um, basically in Magic, if you lightning bolt something and then uh, something has 5 health, you lightning bolt it, deal 3 damage to it, you attack and they block it, and then it takes 2 more damage in combat, it will die. But basically, how they've set it up in Alpha Clash, where you have to deal, you would have to deal 5 damage in either all non-attack action damage or all attack action damage. In the basically, instead of your toughness or life resetting at the end of turn, it resets at the end of each non-combat and combat phase. Which at first I was like, okay, that seems like a good way to like make some of these pinging effects less powerful. But maybe it's just because I was unpracticed with it, but I kept thinking like, oh, so I can attack and then ping, and it's like, oh wait, no, that doesn't work. Or like, oh, this will deal like damage here, and then it'll take damage here, and then like, because it's just like the intuitive way I've played Magic the Gathering for so long. It takes some time to really. I think there's a high mental load for calculating damage like that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think we kind of got used to the non combat damage or non clash damage staying throughout the whole turn because that's how the rules were before. So we'd be like, okay, so if I deal 3 damage to your thing and then I attack it, it'll with my 2 power thing and your guy has 5 defense, it'll die. But now it doesn't, and just like switching between that is a little hard. But now I think it's actually more intuitive, where it's just like, yeah, if you deal damage to something but it doesn't die right away, it's the damage didn't do anything basically.
That's fair. Unfortunately, there's no coffee cards in Alpha Clash.
Like, what would a coffee card do?
Give you energy.
Well, there's no energy.
Yet.
Okay.
Ramp you. Gain you life. It gains me. I'm gaining like 5 life right now.
What else should we talk about?
Let's look at my checklist here. Do we think the game is here to stay?
I really hope so. So after Vegas, I felt pretty good about the game. There were like 50 people at the world premiere and like 50 people in the constructed tournament, and that's pretty good for their first like bigger event. And then at Columbus, it was a lot smaller, and I think a big part of that was it was part of Origins, and it didn't have a limited thing attached to it, so like you had to have a deck to be able to play. And they also didn't announce it nearly as far in advance as they did for the Vegas one. Like the Vegas one, I had my plans booked and set up and knew I was going in more time. Or more time ahead of the tournament than there was time before this one was even announced. So I think we'll see how the next few events go, but I have high hopes. I really do like the game. What do you think?
So, you Flesh and Blood, it took forever for them to get on the ball with announcing their stuff, like a reasonable amount of ahead of time. And I would say this is like the first year where we've had like 0 complaints, right? Like even last year there was some awkward bumping up. I feel like maybe at the beginning of the year, with like announcing things in a reasonable amount of time. But now I think everything is at least like 6 to 9 months of lead time for all their major tournaments, knowing where they are, at least in like when they're happening. So we finally solved that issue in Flesh and Blood, it seems like, which is really nice, and it really helps us plan and travel and do all these things. But obviously, when we're going back to a newer developer again, who's learning the ropes and all this stuff and trying to figure out like what it takes to actually like book a convention hall and like do all this stuff, and they're working with the Round Games, which I'm sure is like a really helpful partnership for them in trying to like navigate and figure all this stuff out. But at the same time, it's still very hard to actually like coordinate, and like takes a lot of lead time for booking these things. And when you're smaller, a lot of these convention centers are kind of like, yeah, whatever, like you're just booking like some small little room. We don't really care as much about you because we're not making as much money off the person who's booking our huge multi-$1,000 bajillion-dollar room, so we're going to care a little bit more about them. Just imagine how the system would go, just knowing how capitalism works. So all that to say that I think the game has the potential to go the distance. It just needs to continue with better set development as they've been doing, and I think more leadway on like their organized play would do a lot as well. But at the end of the day, I think we were hanging out over the weekend, and I even said like Michael and I or anybody in the world could like just design the best like actual like functioning card game in the entire world in 2024. It feels like, and I still don't think it would be like a smash success necessarily. Like there's just so many things that have to go right for card games or just like anything to be successful. And that's not to say like you shouldn't try, but uh like you have to have people's like interests, and you have to have the right people be in the right points of their times to like be able to dedicate the time to it, and they have to have the money to like get into it, and like there just have to be like so many like factors that are just completely outside of your control for card games to like what do we say? Be here to stay. And so, uh, yeah, I think you said I hope so, and I hope so as well. But at the end of the day, it's just one of those things you gotta roll the dice on. I was trying to think of a clever card metaphor instead of dice, but I
Scaps
haven't
get
had
out
enough
of
coffee
theirs.
yet. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think one thing that kind of like gave me a lot of hope was I don't want to misquote him, but Ridge, he's like the lead developer or lead owner of everything Alpha
He's
Clash.
like their version of James
Yeah.
White or of, I want to say Mark Rosewater, but that's not even analogous.
Wizards of the Coast is so corporate now that I don't know if there's
Yeah,
any like
there's
person
nobody
that
like
has
that
the
there
same
anymore. Yeah.
impact as like the James White of their community. But Ridge said in an interview, I'm gonna butcher his quote, but he said something like Flesh and Blood is basically like a great showing of what breaking out as a card game in the modern era looks like, and he's trying to emulate a lot of what they were doing with their competitive organized play system. And that as someone who is very drawn to competitive games, and the reason that we started playing Flesh and Blood was because they had the $1 million organized play announcement. They had a limited calling that was going to be a 2 hour drive for us. We were like that's what pulled us in, and hearing that Ridge is trying to emulate that and do something similar with Alpha Clash is a big part of why I am very interested in this game too.
Yeah. It feels like right now we're getting into like a good analogy would be like getting into Flesh and Blood after like Crucible of War just sort of dropped. And I think the game really caught fire in like Monarch and Tales of Aria,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm not saying like they need to match that exact same level of like excitement and hype and like $1,000 booster boxes, like with that kind of insane demand, the same way Flesh and Blood did. But it's still very early on in the game's like overall like lifespan.
Yeah, I I hope booster boxes never are $1,000. So that just means that people don't have the card, they can't get the cards they need to play, which I think was a pretty big problem and was eventually solved with unlimited, but it
I,
wasn't elegant.
I think it's a complicated situation. I think you don't, in practicality, want them to be $1,000. But if your booster boxes are $1,000 because there's a sudden spike in demand, it creates a very nice little organic marketing campaign for you because then everybody on the internet's gonna be like $1,000 booster boxes. This is crazy. This is and then like it gave like Flesh and Blood so much free advertising. Like
Yeah.
yeah, there's no such thing as bad publicity, I guess.
Okay. if if you say so.
I do say so.
I've definitely heard that saying before, but I'm not sure if I buy it.
Well, I said it on the internet, so it has to be true.
Oh, checks out. Checks out. No such thing as a lie on the internet, too, or
It's
incorrect
illegal to lie on
information.
the internet.
Everything on the internet's true.
Okay, so I think that does like a pretty good job of like covering the basics, the basic fundamentals of the core game. Uh, Game's fun. You should give it a try if nothing else. And uh, Michael and I will be playing it for the foreseeable future, and probably playing in the tournaments that are coming up somewhere. Some, like I think Denver, maybe someplace, sometime in the
The
future.
the next
Couple.
tournament it's posted on the roadmap that it should be in September. I'm really hoping that it is not the first weekend of September or the third weekend of September because I'm busy both those weekends, and maybe that could have changed if the tournament was announced sooner. But we will see, and I hopefully will be there.
It's okay if you can't make it. Somebody else can finally win a tournament. I guess Pete technically won the first major one, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, he crushed it. He did great. He beat me up in the finals.
Mm-hmm. That you were completely focused and intent on playing and didn't have to run away, leaving your cards on the table because of a flight.
Uh, I did run away and leave my cards on the table, and I did make my flight home, but uh,
Yeah.
it was rough. But still, deserving champion. He did great.
What about this one that you won? You just beat everybody up. Did you lose a game?
I lost one game in Swiss, and then in the last round of Swiss, I went 0-2 against Ian because I conceded, and we went and got food.
Mm. Mhm. And then
because
we got like a 40-minute break, anyways.
yeah, oh well. I ended up being second seed going into top 16 because of that instead of, well, if I won, I would have been first seed, but it worked. It's fine.
Yeah.
I got to play against him in the finals, which was awesome.
So you said you were playing Blue Green Machina, which is interesting because it's basically in Magic. It's basically saying like I have a red commander, and then I'm playing islands and forests in my deck with my mountain-based commander. Because in Alpha Clash, you don't necessarily have to play the color identity of the cards in your deck as the color identity as your contender.
Yeah, so every contender is a single color. So basically, if
Right
your
now,
cards,
as it stands.
yeah, for now, if your cards had to match the color of your contender, you would have to be a monocolor deck every time, and that kind of limits deck building a lot. And that's just not what the rules say. You can play whatever cards you want to play in your deck. So the biggest disadvantage to not playing cards of the color matching your contender is you're only allowed to play clash buffs that match the color of your contender in constructed. So if I'm playing a red contender, the only clash buffs I can play are red clash buffs. So clash buffs, we talked about this briefly like a few episodes ago or a while ago, how there were these zero cost clash buffs that were really, really strong, and they basically gave something +2/+2 and drew a card for 0 resources. Well, a few weeks before the tournament, maybe a month or so before the tournament, all 5 of those got banned. There was one of each color. They were all banned. So that really opened up the format where suddenly all these one cost clash buffs that were like good but not amazing now were the only ones you had access to. So if you wanted to play clash buffs, you had to play those. And basically, I was playing these green and blue cards because I really liked how they played together, and I was trying them in all the blue and green contenders to get access to the different clash buffs. And I realized that I could give up the clash buff and play Machina, who synergized really well with some of the cards that were already in the deck. The main one being target list, but also he was good at killing units to enable the one cost Lin. That's very good, and I'll talk about later. But basically, I realized that Machina, the contender's abilities, worked really well with what the deck was trying to do.
Yeah, yeah. It was a really good deck. You obviously played tested into me beforehand, but I guess we'll get into more about why I didn't want to play that deck when we get into one mana Lin.
Okay. So, yeah, so I didn't play clash buffs. All the clash buffs now are fine, and the blue ones are actually quite good, but the blue contenders aren't that great, in
True.
my opinion. So basically, I was like, okay, I'm playing green and blue cards in my Machina deck. The biggest reason I wanted to play blue, there's 2 main reasons to play blue right now. One is I guess there's kind of 2 cards that fit in this category, but the main one is Lin. She is a 1 mana or 1 resource for a 2/2 that when she enters, your opponent mills a card, which doesn't matter that much. You put a bounty counter on one of their units. Bounty counters don't have any text by themselves, but enable other things. And then she has this ability that says, if an opponent's unit or clash card with a bounty counter on it was defeated this turn, you can return a clash card from yours or your opponent's Oblivion, which is basically their discard pile, to your battlefield if it costs less than or 2 or less resources. So you play this Lin, you put a bounty counter on their thing, you kill their thing, and then you can get their thing back. Or if you have other things in your discard, your Oblivion, you can get them back. And that card's just really, really powerful. First, 1 resource for a 2/2 is already better than most of the 1 resource units in the game. The best 1 resource cards other than that, there's a Haven in white that's just a 1/2 that draws a card, which is very, very good. And there's a Torque in red that's one resource for a 1/2 that
Is busted.
uh, he has a really powerful interaction, but that's not what this episode's about. But you ended up playing him in your deck, right? Or yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you talk about him when we get to your deck choice. But yeah, so that Lin, and then you get target list, which is an accessory that when it enters, you get to put a bounty counter or something, and when something under your opponent's control with a bounty counter on it dies, you can do 3 different things, but the one you choose most often is draw a card. The other 2 options are ready a resource or diminish a card from your opponent's deck, which is milling a card.
Ready means untap.
Yes. So these two cards really synergize with each other because they both put bounty counters on things, and they both get a benefit when you kill things with bounty counters. So basically, what you want to pair with these cards are things that are good at killing the things that you put bounty counters on, and that's where the green cards come in. Green has a ton of great removal options, and they also have, well, I guess it's mostly just removal options. uh, so I played green with it because there are several pestilence units that give clash cards minus stats until end of turn, which,
But the minus stats stick off through all the things you said till end of turn, so you can go through as many phases as you want, and those minus effects stick around.
yeah, because they're not damaged. So you can combine those with attacking, because you get something -3/-3, and then let's say they have a 5/5 and you give -3/-3. Now it's a 2/2 for their whole turn, and then you can attack it with something with 2 power. Or the reason that I played Machina was for his ability that you could tap him and sacrifice an accessory and deal 2 damage to anything and draw a card. And the target list happens to be an accessory, so you can throw your target list at them when you don't need it anymore, or at one of their clash cards. And then you just play a bunch of other cheap accessories, because the ability to tap your contender to throw an accessory, deal 2 damage, and draw a card is very good. So I wanted to fill the deck with accessories. So that was most of the deck. There's some value creatures, a creature that, or value clash cards, a clash card that searches for an accessory that puts it into play directly, and just other clash cards that remove things when they enter or give minus to things when they enter. And that was most of the deck.
So, one mana Lin, I think I also made this comparison last episode, I think is just the ancestral recall of creatures. It's so powerful, because it's just so much innate advantage all built into an already slightly above rate creature that you were talking about earlier, just being a 2/2 for 1 resource. So it's easy to fit in with like any curve or whatever. Let's say you play a target list, you kill something, you draw a card, and then you draw your Lin afterwards. It doesn't even need to see the clash card hit the graveyard at the time that it dies for its effect to happen. It's just a static ability that just checks on the end step. If anything on a bounty counter died at the end of your turn, you get to do the thing. So that's really powerful. And it just basically creates a dynamic in your, and I think, and for everybody's deck for the rest of time when they're playing against a Lin, where it's like, what kind of cards should I be putting in my deck, especially post sideboard, or do I want to have in my deck that I know my opponent's just going to get off their Lin? Because if you put anything that costs 1 or 2 and it has like like you talked about that 1 mana Haven, that's a 1/2 that draws a card, that's really powerful. Yeah, well, so you can just go play your Lin, take that, and just draw a card for free, and then now you have a 1/2 and you draw a card, and it's like, okay, well, that was a really cool card that I got to use, and then now my opponent got to use it, and then now they have it, and if I have an effect that wants to take that card and put it in the graveyard, and let's say I draw my Lin afterwards, and but now your cards, like, it just creates a lot of like really complex and awkward deck building decisions, especially post sideboard. If you're like trying to play around this card, if you think it's going to be like everywhere in a given metagame, and that everybody also clearly identifies as the ancestral recall of creatures. But there were people at the tournament there saying like, I don't even think that card's good. And I was like, I made a mistake. I made such a big mistake not playing this deck. I forgot that like most people in the wilderness in the wilds are not very like, looking at cards and knowing how good they are, it is like a very hard thing to do. It's like there's that whole series on YouTube where it's like Hearthstone player evaluates Magic card, or Magic player evaluates Hearthstone cards, or whatever, because like just looking at a card and being like, oh yeah, that's a really powerful effect, like, is usually really 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 hard.
Yeah.
But I think Lin, if you play it all with it quickly proves itself to be like, okay, this is some very powerful things to be doing here. And so I was like, okay, everybody's going to be playing a Lin. I want to play a deck that I think doesn't play into the Lins, and then kind of also does this other powerful thing. And so I could play 1 mana Torque, which you said is a 1/2, but when it enters the
When it enters play,
I
That's
was
a
going to say
trigger
battlefield.
ability.
I don't know if it's a battlefield. When it enters play, it deals 1 damage to your contender. So if they take my torque, they're going to deal a damage to themselves. It has the ability where if it takes non-clash damage, instead of taking the damage, it gets buffed. So it combos with the card that deals 5 damage to everything, and then it gets +5/+5, and then you have your 6 power thing that you can attack with, and it's a big wombo combo. So I was like, I'm going to play this red-white control-y deck with just torque as like the only good take-back target, and uh, yeah, it was a fine deck. It was like, I think it was like maybe a C- tier like deck as far as like its construction, execution, and things like that. But then like there was a different red white deck that kind of broke out at the tournament that made me feel like a big dum dum for playing my red white deck. And it's this Warcry deck that basically it's a new contender with 25 life, and you can attack. And when he attacks, you can exhaust, which is basically like a freeze effect where it doesn't untap during your next untap step. And then target clash card deals damage to its toughness this combat instead of its power. And then there's this new flare card that says like a 0/3. And then at the end of your turn, if it's dealt 5 or more damage, you get to go and tutor for any flare card out of your deck and put it right into play. And so then you get this giant 6 mana flying flare for free out of your deck after you do the thing with it. And there's this clash ground called Grant Park, which just lets you tutor up for the 0/3 flare, and then also gives all your creatures an additional 2 toughness. So if that's on play, then you just have it all lined up. And it was just like the cleanest, like well executed, like clean tutorable combo that I've seen in a card game in such a long time, that I was like, this is like so good. It made me lose all hope of like even wanting an interest in playing my deck. I was just like, I want to be playing that deck. It's like so infinitely, like it's not even just strictly better, it's just like strictly plus times infinity better than anything that's going on in the construction of my deck. So it's very cool. I like that deck a lot. I definitely want to put in a lot of time learning that, or finding something that like can reasonably compete with it. And yeah, that's kind of how everything went. So it was just the first assumption that people would know that Lynn is good, bad. Second assumption that I knew anything about the card game, bad. So, that's how I only wound up at top 16. But hey, I got my Pro Tour invite. So
Woo, that's great. Pro Tour invite.
I get to go to Alpha Clash Pro Tour, wherever and whenever that is.
I believe if you look at the roadmap, I think it is scheduled for December, but no formal announcement yet.
Yeah, December's pretty broad. There's a lot of days of the month in that month.
There's about 31 days.
Yeah.
I would suspect a weekend of December.
It's a bold assumption.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we
First thing Monday morning, Alpha Clash.
Monday through Wednesday. That'd be perfect. I get why you were so down, because their deck had like probably like 20 or 30 cards of overlap with yours, and then the 20 cards they cut from your deck for the 20 cards they put in their deck. Just did a lot of very, very good things.
Yeah. I somehow managed to beat it in Swiss by pulling off a bluff, which I don't know. I'm not very good at bluffing at card games usually, but I was able
That's
to
changing.
I was able to run a line where I had to make my opponent think I had a card that didn't deal direct damage to their contender, and make this attack that made no sense to play around a different like clash card. And then I did have a card that dealt direct damage, and I killed them with it. So woohoo.
Clean.
So anything else about the Clash Ground weekend you want to talk about? Any other decks that caught your eye? I think I watched Ridge's like breakdown of Columbus, and he was like, I'm surprised I didn't see more Pestilence. And I just don't think Pestilence is a very good contender.
Yeah, I think power level wise, Pestilence's ability is fine, but not great. And then
Mm-hmm.
having 20 health and then being a 0/1 with 20 health instead of being a 1/0 with 30 health, which is usually how it goes. So there's some 1/0s with 25 health, and there's even a 2/0 with 25 health. But I think being a 0-1 with 20 health is probably worse than being a 1-0 with 30 health. And I think that his ability is strong, but there's not a ton of good ways to support it right now. Where like most of the cards that you'll play that will be killing something, a lot of them just send it to oblivion, which doesn't trigger Pestilence's ability, which Pestilence ability is when something is defeated, you can engage him to draw a card. Something's defeated outside of clash damage, I believe.
Mhm.
So the main ways to defeat something are, well, fighting it with clash damage or dealing damage or giving it minus, like to reduce its defense to 0, then it'll die. But there aren't a ton of cards that do that, and that's part of why I ended up on Machina in the blue-green deck. Is throwing these accessories to deal 2 damage to something was a really good way to help defeat smaller things.
Yeah. It's also kind of what I was talking about at the start of the episode, and just fundamentals to this game is he's ultimately a contender that relies on using a bunch of different methods to, or like removal spells to kill your opponent's things, or different abilities to destroy your opponent's clash cards. But there's no good cards in the game that do that. So
Yeah, the best ways to remove your opponent's clash cards are with your own clash cards, either by attacking or their abilities that when they enter or when they attack.
yeah. And his second ability like is when he gets below, I think, 10 life, you can just discards out of your hand to give something minus X plus 2, right?
It's minus X plus 1, where X is the
Plus
number of
1.
cards you discard, and you have to
Okay.
discard at least 1.
So, like, that's incredibly card inefficient. So, like, ideally, like, you can, like, discard your card, like, can kill a 2/2, and then play your tap him, and then you, like, it kind of, like, replaces itself to kill a 2/2 for free.
Yep.
But when you're at 10 life, you're not worried about a 2/2. You're not. 2/2s don't matter very much when you're at 10 life. The
I
big
think it might
6/6
be.
flyer that's killing you is what really matters when you're at lower life totals. And discarding 5 cards and then discarding, and if you can, even at that point in the game, and then drawing 1 card is not really good.
Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, I just don't think that contender makes sense in the current design of the game. Um, if there becomes good, efficient removal spells at some point, um, then maybe he's worth looking at. But until that happens, I don't see him being a real contender anytime soon.
Yeah, I think Red has access to some pretty good ways to remove clash cards. I think the
It's got Here Comes the Boom.
Solar Smash is a 2 resource for 3 damage to anything. Here Comes the Boom's 4 resources for 5 damage to everything. And
There's a 3 damage. There's a 3 cost one that deals 5, but none of those are great. None of those are like
yeah,
pushed.
Crimson Scales also is a accessory that you can tap to deal 1 damage to something, and if it
You
that
can only
one
have one
damage
on the
kills.
battlefield though at the time.
Is it exclusive?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or you need Crimson Scales and some Warthogs or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like you can build this giant Rube Goldberg machine using like 16 cards to like efficiently clear your opponent's like 3/3, and like still none of these things deal with like a 6/6, and it's like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the best top end in green is Kagan. It's a 6 mana 5 or 6 cost 5/5 with flight, and when it enters, you can send something to oblivion. But again, that sending something to oblivion won't trigger pestilence because it needs to be defeated, and sending something directly to oblivion doesn't defeat it.
Yeah, it also has 4 green threshold, so that means you need to be heavy committed to green to
Yep.
like even play that card. So a common theme about red and black is also they are also heavy committed on threshold for their better and more powerful card effects. So it is hard to include the good removal with the good green cards. So I don't know.
Yep.
Pestilence doesn't feel particularly good to me. And then the other contender that I saw a lot of was oh, let me look at the top 16 again. I know there was a lot of Machina, there's a lot of Warcry.
There are 3 Machina, 3 War Cries. I think there were
I know
2
there were a couple of
Torques.
Torques. I think Torque's fine.
Yeah, Torque used to be the best deck in the format before they banned the 0 cost clash buffs, made the damage changes, and the new and set 3 came out. But Torque, I think, used to be the strongest contender. You would play that was actually the deck that we played in Vegas. But his ability is whenever you take damage on your own turn or non-clash damage on your own turn, once per turn you can draw a card. So when you play the Torque Contender with the 1 mana Torque that you talked about earlier, it's a 1/2 that when it enters, it deals 1 damage to your own contender. That would just let you draw a card. So it essentially turn your 1 mana Torques into the White Haven, the 1 mana 1/2 that draws a card when it enters, but it also has this like super powerful threat where if you combine it with damage to itself or Here Comes the Boom, then you just get a 1 resource 1/2 that draws a card that's also just going to threaten to do 6 damage after sweeping your board and also survive your board sweep. So that's probably one of the strongest interactions in the game still, just that combination. And then the damage change was a pretty big nerf to Torque because his contender ability when he's at 30 health or less, which is his starting life, is you could tap him or engage him to deal 1 damage to something. So it would be really common you would engage him to deal 1 damage to their 1/2 that's tapped, and then you would attack it with your 1/2, and then their 1/2 would die, your 1/2 would live, and it'd be a great trade. But now, because of the damage change, when Torque pings something and you go to fight something, you go to your clash phase, it heals back up. So that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. I pulled up the top 8. The top 8 was actually just all Machina.
Warcry and Torque.
Yeah.
3,
There are a couple other fringe decks, like some idiots playing Clarity in the top 16.
You weren't the only Clarity player at the top 16, so.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't say that. One very specific idiot playing Clarity in the top 16. Yeah.
Clarity's a really cool contender. Her ability is at the start of your turn, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put them back on top, put them on bottom, put 1 on each. You can do whatever you want with them, basically. You opt in Flesh and Blood, opt to.
The problem is that it's not the same as having those cards in your hand for actually resourcing them. So I think the biggest issue I was running into was just like actually figuring out how to resource cards effectively while using this ability, because she doesn't have any like real methods of like card advantage, like ways to actually put those cards into your hand again. So like you have to commit to fully drawing those, and you want to be drawing your more powerful cards with her ability, but then what are you resourcing? Because it's just like, oh, so like I think she's powerful. I think that ability is good, but I think it's just not as good as like actually drawing cards that other contenders have access to.
Yeah. She gets to see a lot of cards, but she doesn't get the cards in her hand, and she just can definitely run into some card quantity issues if your cards aren't like trading for multiple of your opponent's cards. And in a constructed deck where you can play 4 copies of each card and you're like, the limit's 50 cards, or you only have to get up to 50 cards, it's pretty easy to get to a spot where like most of the cards in your deck are quite good, and you're usually happy drawing most of the cards in your deck, which makes her ability recently weaker. And the ones that you don't want to draw in that specific matchup, you just resource.
Exactly. Well, game's fun. Excited to play it more in the future. Do you have any final thoughts, Michael? 3 years later.
I always think when you ask me this, because I'm like, we're wrapping up the episode. What do I want to say? It was my last things. I don't know. I do really like the game. I really hope it does well and takes off. I hope that they announce the next tournament soon, because I would love to go there and make plans, but we'll see. I guess it's like I already have 2 weekends booked in September, so it might be too late, but we'll see. Hopefully it lines up with something I can do.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely would like to attend if possible, but you never know till you know, you know?
You never know till you know. That's true.
Well, next time, you're never knowing until you know.